Remember field trips and first dates? Generations have come to the Exploratorium to learn and play. Now we need your help, and every dollar you donate will be doubled. Sustain the wonder. And every dollar you donate will be doubled.
Hello. Thank you for joining us tonight for After Dark Online, an evening with Manual Cinema. My name is Kathleen McGuire, and I'm part of the Arts and the Public Programs teams at the Exploratorium. While tonight we are joining you remotely from the Bay Area as well as Chicago, I want to acknowledge that the home of After Dark, the Exploratorium, is located at Pier 15 in San Francisco on unceded territory traditionally belonging to the Ramaytush Ohlone people, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and future for their conservation and stewardship of this land. Before sharing more about tonight's program and Manual Cinema, I wanted to share that the Exploratorium is thrilled to have recently announced our reopening on July 1st. And this includes daytime hours as well as 18+ after dark hours. You can head to our website to learn more about reopening and ticketing, as well as about memberships, because our members will be getting some special previews a week in advance. Also, our extended closure has been quite challenging, and we're currently fundraising for our recovery. You can find out more about that by visiting exploratorium.edu/support. So on to tonight, which I'm so excited for this program and to enjoy it alongside all of you, where we have a few members of Manual Cinema here with us live. To share a little bit about the company, Manual Cinema is an Emmy Award-winning performance collective, design studio, and film and video production company founded in 2010 by Drew Dir, Sarah Fornace, Ben Kauffman, Julia Miller, and Kyle Vegter. Using vintage overhead projectors, multiple screens, puppets, actors, live feed cameras, multi-channel sound design, and a live music ensemble, they create the experience of attending the cinema and imbue it with energy, ingenuity, and theatricality. The company was awarded an Emmy in 2017 for The Forger, a video created for the New York Times. They were named Chicago Artists of the Year in 2018 by the Chicago Tribune. And their shadow puppet animations will be featured in the upcoming film remake of Candyman, which I know I have been eagerly awaiting to see on a big screen since movie theaters first closed. And also, the Exploratorium is looking forward to working with and hosting Manual Cinema in real life in 2022. For tonight's program, we're joined by co-artistic directors Sarah Fornace, Julia Miller, and Ben Kauffman. Over the next hour, they'll walk us through an anatomy of a scene, inviting us right inside their studio to show the tools and techniques they use to build their multimedia performances. And in the latter part of the program, they'll be taking questions live for you. So please do write your questions in the chat as they come up, and we'll keep track of those to give them on to the crew as we get to the question part of the program. And now I'll pass it off to Sarah, Julia, and Ben. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, Kathleen, for that lovely introduction. We are huge fans of the Exploratorium, and it's such a pleasure to be with you all virtually tonight for this After Dark program. My name is Sarah. I'm one of the co-artistic directors, and I also play Mary Shelley and Victor Frankenstein in Manual Cinema's newest show, Frankenstein.
My name is Julia. I'm also a co-artistic director, and I play the creature and Elizabeth in Frankenstein.
Hey everyone, Ben Kauffman, also an co-artistic director of Manual Cinema. I am the co-composer and co-sound designer of Frankenstein.
And we're beaming to you live from our warehouse studio here in Chicago. The plan for tonight is we wanted to show you a little bit of how we do what we do, how we make live movies from scratch with our hands and paper and musical instruments. So we're going to show you a short clip from Frankenstein, from one of our shows. And then we're going to kind of take you behind the scenes and show you some of the actual technologies and puppets and things that we use to make that show.
Yes. Yeah, we're also gonna do some sound design stuff and check out some robots and other music jams.
Yeah. Hope you enjoyed that very tiny excerpt from the show. So that looks like a movie, but actually that clip is taken from a live performance. All of those visuals are made live by hand in front of an audience.
We actually have a still of what the stage looks like to the audience during the performance. Above the stage is a giant projection screen that shows what you just saw, the final image of the show. And then below you see a smaller shadow screen with a table of overhead projectors. There are 5 puppeteers on stage playing all of the characters and doing all the puppetry. There's shadow puppetry as well as acting in front of the camera. And then we also have 4 musicians on stage playing an arrangement of percussion instruments, strings, all sorts of stuff on stage that looks like a kind of a mad lab. And those are all happening in real time to create the imagery, the sound design, and the score of the show in real time while you're also watching this kind of final film version. We have one more picture, I think, of the camera setup. There you go.
And you can see the camera never moves. It's set there on the table with some lights around it. And we have that camera set up to show you here in our studio today. So to make the image that you just saw, we're all dancing around the cameras. So we thought we would start behind the scenes at the very back of our setup, which is the overhead projectors. So these overhead projectors are some of the ones we use in the show. There's 4 on stage to make the images that you just saw. I remember using these for science fairs like back in the 90s, and all of these we get used from the internet. So a lot of these have been in schools for decades and decades before they make their way to our warehouse. So we put the puppet or the image that we want to show on top of the overhead projector on this bed of light. And then using a focal lens and a Fresnel lens, it throws that image up onto the screen. Another very important piece of tech that is maybe hard to see is this piece of paper. We call them the faders, and it's just like simply a piece of cardstock or like heavy paper. You can also use cardboard that we tape to the top of the overhead projectors. And this is what lets us do a lot of those cinematic transitions that you saw in the piece. So we can do cuts and crossfades and dissolves, and Julie and I will show you how. So here we've got our shot of Ingolstadt, the university castle where Victor is studying. And I can use my fader to cut to Julia's projector, where she has a close-up of Victor Frankenstein. We can also crossfade back by controlling the tempo through which we open and close the image. And then last but not least, one of my favorite cinematic transitions that we've adapted to this handmade style is the dissolve, where we use our hands under the lens to open and close the image. This is great for dream sequences and also later in this monster movie where stuff starts getting like a little bit weird and reality starts fraying. We use a lot of these handmade dissolves. The puppets are made out of 2 very simple materials. So this is Ingolstadt, and you can see this is paper here. It doesn't matter what color the paper is because we're just seeing the silhouette or the shadow of it on screen. And then behind is the film, and this is what we can use to make shadow. It's called acetate, and we design all of our backgrounds on the computer and then print them out using like a very simple laser printer. So this has, a very specific lighting design to get that glow coming off the mountain with the darker clouds around it.
So Sarah was describing kind of editing that we do on the projectors, but there's also other cinematic techniques like camera movement that we are also trying to translate into our live performances. And one of those techniques is a pan. So this is an example of a vertical pan we use in the show. That's from the bed where the creature lays into the clock tower. And I'll show you guys how that works.
So Julia's taking the puppet and she's sliding it across the bed of the projector, and that gives us the vertical pan. And it's hard to tell, but actually the overhead projector is upside down and backwards. So Julia's having to like reverse the movement from her hands to the screen that she's watching.
It's very much like this kind of exercise that you get better at the more you do it. Another type of pan we use is, or did we talk about medium close-up?
We should talk about close-up, medium, and far shot. So Every single one of these puppets is designed with cinematic composition in mind. So every single one of them is designed to be pretty much either a close-up, a medium, a far shot, or some kind of variation therein. So this first puppet that you saw, this is a far shot because you can see the location of the university and the environment around it. Versus this is a close-up shot. This is a close-up of Victor Frankenstein. This is the one that was looking at the skull and that close-up shot where he gets the idea that you saw. These are great for reaction shots. We call them big heads because you can see the scale. We literally build them bigger so it seems like they're closer up. And then another really important type of shot is the medium shot. And for those, we often use our own silhouette inside of the light. And Julia will show you a little bit more about that.
This is a horizontal pan that we use for medium shots with live actors. Sarah's going to run around to the other side of the screen where the camera is. So we should switch to that camera to show you what this trick looks like.
Did you? I did. Great. Julia, you want to make sure your sound is off? I'm here at Victor Camp. You can't see my face yet because we have the lights off so that we can see me in shadow profile. So Julia's on the projector with the background, and I'm going to stand right against the screen. And the idea is that this is a tracking shot. The camera is keeping track of Victor as he moves through the library. So I'm going to walk in place, and Julia is actually the one who's controlling the way that we follow Victor through the scene. So even though it looks like I'm moving, Julia's the one who's actually doing the movement. And let me turn on our lights here at Victor Cam so you can see us. So this is the camera setup that we use in the show. So that in that scene that you saw, this is the exact same setup. We've got a camera on a tripod, and then I've got a screen below that I can use as a monitor so I can stand off screen and see how my puppetry is working. This setup actually is a lot like Zoom, and we spent a lot of time during the pandemic teaching and using Zoom to make manual cinema style shows with people when they're by themselves in their house. So this is actually a great medium to make a DIY music video or a DIY film on your own. We wanted to show you some of the tricks that we use here. One of my favorite ones is at the very beginning when we see Victor hand over his paper about reanimating life to his professors who think his ideas are patently ridiculous and also probably very dangerous. So I, as Victor, plant myself on camera, and I hand the paper straight to the camera. And then Julia is going to play the professors. She grabs the paper, and we kind of do-si-do around each other. And I cheat my way off screen.
I don't actually do this in the show, so it was very fun. And as you can see, it really is like dance choreo, and we really compare rehearsing and learning a manual cinema show to learning dance choreo because everything we do is so integrated with another person. It's also kind of like being in a pit crew at NASCAR or something because you're really going and working. The show doesn't stop once we start going. Everyone's playing a lot of different characters. They're acting as editors, puppeteers, and moving all sorts of things around. So it's a lot of action happening on stage.
And it's nice because you get to do a little bit of everything. Like I don't have to decide whether I want to be like an actor or an editor or a director on the piece because we get to do it all. It's also nice that it's a non-hierarchical like devising process. So, you know, Drew came in with the puppets like in order of the story. And then Julia and I and the three other women in the show kind of took them and said, okay, yeah, how can we do this over the shoulder shot? How can we make this moment of creeping through the library work? And then we stage it all together, all just throwing in ideas for how the choreography can unfold. So I wanted to show us a couple more tricks for this kind of static camera manual cinema dance. So besides our bodies, we also use a lot of puppets here, and they're designed differently than the puppets that we use for silhouette. So this skull is a pretty good example of one of our on-camera puppets. It has lots of detail, which is really nice on the camera. But as you see from the back, this is just a piece of printer paper that we have printed the image onto. So it's kind of my job as Mary Shelley to give this skull weight and to hold it in frame in a way that makes it real and not just a piece of paper that I have with me. And that's different than the puppets that we use for shadow silhouette. So this is the skull that Victor picks up in the scene you saw in his laboratory. So this is designed for just silhouette shape, versus the shape of this is not very interesting, but it has the detail for on camera. So that's something we think about when we design. When we're up here, we're thinking about some of the same things that we think about when we make the puppets for back there, specifically shot composition, close-up, medium, and far shots. So I'm in a medium close-up here. And to do close-up, medium, and far on camera, we don't have to build stuff at different scale. We can just move actually closer for an extreme close-up or farther back to be in a medium shot, or maybe have to build a small puppet for a really far shot.
Which is novel for us because on the projectors, you really have to build to the frame. And this, we're just able to move our bodies. So it may not seem like a big deal, but for us, it was huge because we could hold something and change the scale with us by just changing our distance from the camera.
Yeah. And it lets us really help guide the audience's eye. So, and to connect the story. So as Victor Frankenstein, you could see me getting very excited about something I see in the library. And then we can swoop around to do the close up of the hand and see what is he excited about? The book on electricity. And this book is another example of just a very simply built puppet. It's just a piece of paper where we designed a book cover that was exciting to us, and then we put it on a piece of cardboard.
So we started as a shadow puppet company, and all these camera techniques got layered on over the years. We've been making work for about 10 years. So the shadow stuff is really our ground line for creating work, but then the camera stuff is slowly we're figuring out as we go for different shows. And something that we learned when we started putting actors and puppets in front of the camera is that we didn't have faders to edit between shots. We couldn't take one projector down and then come up on another that was already had a new image on it. We had to figure out how to cut between images with a fixed camera that was always feeding live. So one example that you saw in the video and that Sarah just did is swiping puppets in and out of the lens. And that's how we can obscure the image, let a performer say get set, and then we can reveal the next shot. I also am really bad at this puppet because I don't do it. Okay, there you go.
Again, backwards.
Backwards.
Yeah, and I get the easy part. I just get to play the hands and really play it up clock tower. And then I pretend push it. Yeah, and a puppeteer has to actually move the door because it's just a big piece of foam core.
And we love doing stuff like this with the design to really just take every amount of storytelling, to tell our audience as much as we can. Because it's nonverbal, the designs often have details. This one's a little obvious. It just says clock tower on it, so you know where we are. Another version of a swipe we have is this desk shot that Sarah's going to show.
So for this one, we can again block out the camera and set in this, medium close-up shot on Victor. But what I like about this is that I block out the camera and set myself, but then the payoff of this is that we do another over-the-shoulder shot similar to with the professors. And then I'm actually controlling the close-up and doing the hand tracking myself. So the idea is that the camera is tracking with the hands, but actually what I'm doing, if I show you back here, is I'm holding my hand still and moving it around to the last image, which is yes, clock tower. That's what I need for the next step of my plan.
So that gives you a little taste of the shadow puppetry and the on-camera stuff. We also wanted to talk a little bit about another huge element, which is costume design and character design for Frankenstein. And I think we actually have a picture.
We do. We have a picture of Mary Shelley.
There it is.
So Mary Shelley is actually the outer frame of our story. We begin with her. And we begin actually with the loss of her baby. And she talks about this in her foreword to the second publication of Frankenstein, about how she lost her child and had this dream of reanimating her. So I played both Victor and Mary Shelley, and there's a lot of quick changes between these characters. So that costume that you see, there's like a wig that can come on and off really quickly, and then there's a whole period dress that Mika Vanderploeg has engineered to have like zippers in the and special like underarm like stretchy areas so that we can tuck and roll and run all around the stage and also get in and out of them quickly. And I can show you some of those zippers.
We have another picture of the creature design. And this was a tricky one because, again, all of our characters need to read well in front of the camera, in silhouette, and in this case, a 3D puppet. So we have another picture of the mask, I believe. So Mika, our costume designer, and Lizzie Bright, who designed the puppets, worked in tandem to create something that could look really effective in camera, but also in shadow. I think we have another picture of a silhouette. And then if we cut back to our camera, I have the mask here that you guys can check out. So it also has a lot of different detail, and there's like different kinds of hair attached to it. It goes over my face, and I would wear teeth. Because it's a half mask, I also have some teeth to flesh out the character design, and kind of like a creature skin that goes underneath all of this to help kind of distort my frame. And it just keeps everything really flat to my head, so I can literally just, the functionality of tearing this on and off anytime I have to play a different character. The functionality is so important to like all the objects we use, because we're kind of throwing stuff around and running around the stage for an hour for the show. So everything is made to be pretty durable also.
And this character design, yeah, like Julia said, it's unique. It needs to go across so many different modalities. And behind us here, we have one of the big heads, one of the close-ups. So this like cutout is designed to work in shadow. So it's a little bit of a non-literal interpretation of the way that it looks on Julia's face. For instance, if Julia was in shadow, you couldn't see that eye because, again, she'd be all opaque, blocking the light. There is one more iteration of the creature that is really at the heart of our show. And the creature is at the heart of Mary Shelley's novel. And we were very interested in the way that Mary Shelley has various progeny. You know, she calls the book her hideous progeny, but she also had this story about this loss, this experience of loss in the inspiration for the story and the inspiration for the novel. So we were really interested in the ways that the creature is created, but also the ways that the creature comes into the world. And we were really struck by, even though other characters describe him as large or are intimidated by his scale, the creature actually in that moment is much more akin to a baby. All of his senses are coming online. He's experiencing the world for the first time. So in order to stage that in our show, we decided that we really needed a puppet that was the size of a baby, that really captured that intimacy and the fragility of the creature in that first moment of birth. So we have a little bit of a sizzle reel, a few edits of that baby-sized creature puppet for the creature's entrance into the show to show you right now. So this is the creature puppet designed by Lizzie Bright.
It's in the style of a bunraku or tabletop puppet in that it's kind of like a doll in that its legs and arms move, and it takes, we usually have 2 to 3 puppeteers on it. And you can see there's a lot of really incredible detail of different found materials that she used. I'm getting a little blown out.
Oh yeah. Yeah, she actually used a lot of found and recycled materials to create the creature. So there's bits of t-shirts, there's scraps of leather, there's a lot of materials we had around the studio that she used as inspiration and then in her creation.
And there are pieces that Mika used in my costume that are also represented on the puppet. And there's a really incredible mechanism that helps him blink. That is in the back of his head here.
And one of my favorite parts is at the end of the show. So at the end of the show, we see Mary Shelley and the creature, and this is why it's so important that the creature is this scale, because we spent the previous parts of the show having the creature look for his creator, kind of questing after Frankenstein. And Mary herself is kind of like questing after her lost child and questing after like a healthy mourning. So at the end of their quest, these two characters find each other. And Mary Shelley finally picks up and cradles the creature and boops his little nose. And Julia brings the creature to life, and I hold him like he's a baby. So that is essentially all of our tricks and techniques and how we made Frankenstein, and that we use in a lot of our work.
Yeah, it's definitely this show is definitely our biggest show. Our first shows definitely had like 2 overhead projectors and didn't have live action, so we've definitely developed our vocabulary over time. We really also wanted to throw it over now to Ben, who's going to talk about the music and sound design.
Hey everyone. So yeah, as we mentioned before, all manual cinema shows, including Frankenstein, features live music and a quadraphonic sound system and sound design. So we have multiple performers on stage. In Frankenstein, that's cello, woodwinds, bass clarinet, and contrabass clarinet, and a whole range of percussion. And in the premiere, also prepared piano. So yeah, in this picture, you can see this is one of the really big elements and kind of one of the things that maybe took the longest for Kyle and I as the composers and sound designers to work out. But this is a giant percussion rack, and it features a whole host of instruments. Some of them are found objects. So you can see there are flower pots. There's a big pot, like cooking pot from a thrift store. Old like automobile like wheels, and they're also on the right side of the image these giant pipes that are cut to pitch. And so almost all of the performers in the show actually play some of this percussion, besides the percussionist Peter Ferry, who's amazing. But yeah, it's kind of one of the pieces that's sort of a bit of the sonic glue for the show is all the percussion. Another thing that really sets our work apart, we think, is the quadraphonic sound design. So if you go to a movie in a movie theater, you're probably used to the surround sound. So you have speakers in front of you as well as to the side and behind you. And as you know, big fans of film sound design, we wanted to bring that immersiveness to theater. Often theater, you know, it might have stereo, so 2 speakers in front of you, but in our experience, it's just less common in theater for that really immersive experience. And this is kind of a technique we've developed over the last 10 years, but it's really important for our work. So I'm actually going to do a screen share, and I'm going to show you kind of behind the scenes what a sound design session looks like. And I'll play a couple of sounds as well. So hopefully you can see that. the scene that I wanted to show you all is a little bit later than the scene we first saw. This is sort of the "It's Alive" part of the show, so it's kind of when the monster is first kind of given life. And this is a good example of sort of all the different layers of sound that go into creating a scene. There's background ambience that is underneath pretty much every shot in the live show. And that's kind of like these layers here that you see. I We also have things like thunder and weather. So that sounds like this. And then once the It's Alive kind of really gets started in earnest, you'll see if I scroll down here, you'll see the sound design kind of gets much more dense. And you'll get this. Yeah, so there's all kinds of individual electricity, kind of thing. There are playing for some reason. There's a kind of blinking dials that are kind of screaming, and then of course on top of this is music, and all of those kind of come together to really give you the drama of the like It's Alive, like the kind of classic scene. And then one other element that makes Frankenstein kind of unique as far as the music and sound design is that in addition to the human musicians, we also have some automated robot percussionists. I will show close-up of what they look like, and then we'll play a video. So this is what the robot percussion looks like. These are powered by solenoids, which is basically this kind of contraption gets a little bit of voltage from a controller, and it basically is a magnet actuated mechanism. So when it gets voltage, the magnet moves and it causes the kind of arm here to move. We use a thing called the data machine, which converts MIDI signal from our computer, MIDI patterns, into voltage. And so it has 12 different outputs of voltage, so we can have 12 different robot percussionists that each play their own pattern. And so you could probably hear that in the background of some of the scenes you saw before. But now if we could play that third video, you'll see much better what the robots are doing. Awesome. So yeah, you can kind of see here the robots are also playing kind of a collection of percussion objects. Some of them found objects, some of them objects that were fabricated by us, like the different lengths of pipe that are also cut to pitch. They're also playing traditional percussion instruments like a snare drum or a woodblock. The robot is also playing a drum pad, which is kind of its own, also a robot. So it's like a robot playing another robot. Um, and besides this being like a fun thing for us to experiment with, we found that it had a lot of like thematic resonance with the show. So the story of Frankenstein is the kind of tension between um, creating life, being responsible for your creations, the kind of push and pull of the quote unquote human and unhuman. And so once we discovered the robots as a musical instrument, it became really clear that thematically it was interesting to have this kind of play between live human musicians and live robotic musicians. So there are points where the robots are kind of playing free form with the musicians, and there are also moments where the musicians actually have to follow the robots because the robots are kind of playing to a specific tempo, and every show, you could have a show 2 months later, the robots are going to play the exact same tempo every time. And so sometimes the musicians have to kind of defer to the robots. And so, yeah, it besides being kind of fun and interesting to see them on stage, it also hopefully adds a kind of layer, a thematic layer to the music and sound design. Awesome. So I think that's it as far as us talking to you all. And now we would love to take your questions, and we're going to try and answer as many of them as we can. So
Oh,
let's do
I
it.
just had a quick note because I think not only do the musicians have to defer to the robots, but so do the puppeteers because they just go and they won't like hold for you because you're a little late on your entrance or a puppet was out of place. So it's like everyone on stage has to defer to the robots because once they start, like once you hear that first hit, it's like, all right, we better just like get to the end of the sequence in time.
But I love them so much. Like I just like tell everyone like I'm in a show with robots.
Yeah, I mean they're not at all humanoid, but they still are cute, and you still like get this familiarity with them. But definitely note to like the future of human race, robots can be tyrants because they just go and they don't listen.
I anthropomorphize them so much, like especially when like if the robot got like a little uncalibrated, like if we're doing like a long sit down run and it got just like a little bit off its track, then you just have a robot like in perfect time, like trying really hard to hit the tambourine and like not getting it, and it just hits my heart.
Yeah.
Well, now let's segue to our first question from Madeline. The robots are animated by electricity just like the creature. Wow. Were you thinking about that parallel when you made them, Ben?
That's a great question. Yeah, we once we came across the robots and the Dada machine, which I encourage everyone to check out. It's like a small one person project, and it's really cool. But yeah, once we discovered that, we kind of immediately understood the parallel and the connection. And we also, in manual cinema, we talk a lot about like high tech, low tech. So we have overhead projectors, which are, I don't know, 30, 40-year-old technology at this point. But we also have like live video mixing, and in the robots in particular, there's a similar like high low tech thing going on because, as you mentioned, the robots, the the thing that actually controls this mechanism is just a quick pulse of voltage. So that's obviously like not new or high tech in 2021. But you know, it's all being controlled by a computer. The MIDI is being sent over Ethernet connection. Hopefully that's not too like nerdy. I think this is the right place for that. But you know, so like there's elements that are old, but also the way it comes together, you probably couldn't have done even 10 or 15 years ago. The tech might not have been like fully up to do this kind of task. But yeah, it was definitely something we were aware of, and it was exciting to explore because we knew it had a place in the storytelling and the themes of the show, which is ultimately how we make our decisions.
And we responded by also putting a robotic arm into the actual story, and had Victor make a robotic arm and put it onto the creature, which is something that we wrote into the creation sequence.
From Sam, what are some of the influences and inspirations for Frankenstein's sound design? Hi, Sam.
Hi, Sam. That's a good question. I think for us, the way we kind of thought about the sound design was the show is sort of organized in these different concentric frames. So you have the Mary Shelley sort of her story as a woman, as an author, and then we have kind of within that the Victor Frankenstein story, and then at the very center of the show we have the creature, and that's an opportunity for the creature to tell its story. And so the sound design kind of follows that. So we have these concentric frames of sound design with different characters for each of them. So yeah, like the outermost frame, the Mary Shelley story, it's fairly naturalistic. It's not particularly stylized. It's also period, so that requires creating and finding sounds that are period specific. So you know, the outside of Mary Shelley's house, you are not going to have like cars and traffic, because that's not the right time period. You're going to have horse and buggy. You're going to have cobblestone streets instead of asphalt. And so you have to find sounds that sort of match the images that you're seeing and the world that you're in. The Victor Frankenstein story is more stylized. It's more heightened. We're playing with early American cinema as far as the aesthetic of the visuals, and so we try and match that. And in the innermost frame, that's maybe the hardest to describe. It's really supposed to be the creature's voice, and it's kind of off kilter and weird, and it can be kind of awkward at times, and hopefully, like, as the creature develops, the kind of sound design coalesces. Yeah, I mean, we're inspired by all kinds of movies and music and just sound in general, but the guiding principle was really the frames.
And I feel like you guys did a really awesome job with, like, when the creature first sort of awakes, the idea of how like intense and new everything is. Like, all the light is too bright, all the sound is like too loud, and I feel like the goal of the show was to sort of put the audience in the perspective of that. And I feel like it was the sound design really helped sort of transport people into the interiority of the baby creature puppet.
Yeah, especially because we were doing like really fractured POV shots, and like the sound design was what helped us kind of do these more experimental shots. So we just see, you know, bright lights and the blinks of eyes. And we like move the creature in a way that it looks like, you know, he's looking at bits of his own hands, and then the eyes blink again and go away. So we get these like really fractured kind of like POV impressions. And I think that the sound design is really the bed that we like ride on top of for that.
Yeah, I think that moment also, the sound design is quite loud and abrasive, and it does kind of jar you into the kind of like trauma of being created or of birth.
Opening your eyes for the first time.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, like there's a reason, like there's a reason babies are crying when they're born. Like it's really intense. It's bright. It's probably
Breathing
loud.
air for the first time.
Yeah, exactly.
And one of my favorite like tidbits that Kyle sometimes talks about when he talks about sound design is that, and is this true, Ben, that the sound that you guys used as when the creature's awaking comes from like bells at a graveyard in Paris that Kyle captured while on tour?
Yeah. I wish Kyle could tell it better than me. But yeah, the creature sounds are like field recordings that Kyle made that have been like heavily processed, and yeah, I mean we take sound from like anywhere we can find it. Yeah, sometimes it doesn't need any processing, sometimes it's like totally transformed with different effects.
Our next question is from Richard Lewis. What drives your puppetry evolution? Ooh, good question. I think a lot, or at least what I think drives our puppetry evolution tends to be narrative, tends to be storytelling. We try in our puppetry not to be like tech first, but to be story first.
Which is funny because we have a lot of tech in all of our shows.
I mean, I guess like overhead projector like was like one of the first like ingredients of like the very first show when Julia's coming up with the story for that. But for instance, like Frankenstein, like Ben said, it's a novel of frames and it's a show of frames. So each part of the puppetry was like designed to think about what each frame needs. So Mary Shelley's story is like really intimate and wants to feel really grounded and like true in a way, like emotionally true. And funnily enough, putting it all in shadow, even though that takes away the face, like creates that intimacy. We felt like that form of puppetry invited the audience into Mary Shelley and her life in a way that we were really excited by. And the backgrounds are all of this kind of like painterly watercolor aesthetic. Again, very warm. And then when we go into Victor Frankenstein, it's in black and white. We've got more details, but we're like really pushing the puppetry to act like silent cinema. And we felt like that was like capturing some of like the untrustworthiness of like Victor as a narrator and of his POV, and the stylization of that style of performance, of that like chewing the scenery, like silent movie performance. One is fun, but two, like also for me, like helped convey the idea of like, oh, I think we cannot quite trust him. Like there's an artifice to Victor Frankenstein.
I feel like we're also just, we're so interested in trying to figure out how you can stage a live movie and how to create like cinema in a theatrical context. And we've given ourselves these very specific parameters to do that, but we're really curious in pushing the boundaries of it. So even just like working in this container has pushed us, because we don't want to do the same thing over and over. We're always trying to experiment and explore this format. And just that alone has also led to a lot of our experimentation. But I think, like Sarah said, we always want it to be to service the narrative. We don't want to have tech for tech's sake, because we are storytellers first and foremost. And I think that we're always trying to figure out how the visuals or the sound design or the whatever the method that we're telling the story, does it really serve the story? Is this the only way we could imagine? This is the best version of telling it in this format. I feel like is something we constantly ask ourselves. Mm-hmm. And we've definitely failed. Like we've definitely like had ideas that we thought would work and then staged them and they don't work. Like we had a show where we wrote in a character who was a game show host.
Oh, and a voiceover artist.
And he was a voiceover artist first. And then we were like, no one else talks. This doesn't make sense. Yeah. So we've definitely experimented and failed, but we also are just always experimenting too, I would say.
And like always going back in and changing the shows. Like we don't really reiterate like on every single show. This version of Frankenstein that you see is like maybe the 4th version.
Of like feature length shows that we made of what we thought was the final version of Frankenstein, and then had to go back and like rewrite and cut and edit. And
yeah, there's so much trial and error because since we are live theater, we're like making this in partnership with the audience who's watching it. So it isn't until we get it in front of an audience that we can see what it's doing, and then go in and change it.
And it takes so long to make. It's usually, you know, we don't always have previews for shows or a preview process. So sometimes it's not until it's up in front of an audience that we're like, oh, this is how it works. This is working, but maybe this isn't. Or
yeah, we like have a hypothesis, but then we need to test it.
Yeah. We have another question. From B. Will, I've loved seeing the progression from just projection shadows to including live action. What sorts of things help you determine which to use in a particular scene?
Oh, that's such a good question. Part of it is practical. For instance, like a far shot, right, where you want to see Victor Frankenstein's whole body and say maybe him digging in a graveyard. Do you want to grab that graveyard shot? There's a limit to the amount of space we have and how far away I can get from the camera. So for that far shot, like I couldn't do it with my body because I just wouldn't be small enough. Like it wouldn't be possible. So in that case, it's like, oh, let's build a puppet to do it. So that, for instance, this is
so big.
This is one of the shots you saw while like Victor's like digging in the graveyard. And because we want to see the context of his whole body, we make that into a puppet. But one of the great things is that we have really sized our screen for medium shots. And medium shots are like shots in which you usually in cinema see interpersonal relationship. They're like really meaty shots for showing relationship and exchange between characters, or showing, you know, more of a character's like detailed interactions inside of a space. So that's like a way in which the size of our screen like really fits with some of the like cinema like languages that are already in place. So that's why in a story we'll go to a medium shot when we know we have like a scene that will pay off for it, and then we will use a live from the body.
So we're going to just take one more question after this one, but I wanted to pop back in to say thank you so much to Julia, Sarah, and Ben for inviting us into your studio. And for folks who have seen you live, they've maybe experienced this, but for other people, you often at the end of shows invite people on stage, and sometimes they get to see this equipment, and it's such a special experience. And I really appreciate that you've shared an even more intimate version of it by bringing us straight into your studio tonight. And again, we so look forward to when we all meet in person and get to have these objects and these performances at the Exploratorium sometime in 2022. But maybe we'll bring up the last question. Yeah.
From Alyssa Stone, what is the process to choose stories to tell? Are there any stories that y'all would love to do but haven't been able to conceptualize yet?
Good question.
Good question. I mean, yeah, I feel like all of us are sitting on, I don't know, like a space opera.
Yeah, I really want to do a sci-fi piece,
for example. Or, yeah, I don't know. I feel like we've just run the gamut from doing like sort of interior developed projects where we're coming up with the narrative to like adaptation of poetry. We have a Gwendolyn Brooks project. We've worked with, Frankenstein as text. We worked with Lorca as text. We've also created, Ben and Kyle wrote a song cycle that we then made a show based on. So like each show really does have a different kernel.
Yeah, not every story in the world will work as a manual cinema show. So we're dealing with like several different constraints. Like some of our shows have some dialogue or text, but our the place we generally start is, can we tell this story with visuals and cinematic language, music, and sound design? So that alone rules out like tons of stories, tons of stuff that, you know, like, I don't know, most movies you would see in a theater are like very dialogue heavy, very like face heavy, and we like take those things away. And so there are stories we would love to tell, but like just don't make sense for our medium.
And I feel like
So that kind of,
or that makes me think about just like the things I consume, and the stuff that I feel like is the most effective is like a story that could only be told in that way, where the story and the form really merge to create something like new and exciting. And there's just like so much like dynamic energy in that. And I feel like that's kind of a thing that drives us when we're trying to choose projects. And you know, ideally it would be something that, yeah, like this could only be told like this in this way to tell like this tale, I think is like the dream version of the work. And sometimes there's like moments in that, or sometimes the whole, you know, it's such a elusive thing too sometimes. But yeah. And then I trailed off. But yeah, actually, I think that was our last question, but I did want to mention, you can check out all of our other shows. We have a bunch of live shows in our archive, some that tour and that will be touring again later this year and next year. If you go to manualcinema.com, you can also watch trailers for all our shows. And then we also have a lot of video work that you can check out there too. We created a lot of puppet animations with music and sound design as well.
And almost all the videos are free and online. So the Forger through the New York Times, videos we've made for Puppet Magazine, who we've been in the Bay Area with, our Gwendolyn Brooks videos. So if you click, you can watch the full video. And it uses a lot of the same techniques that we developed in these live shows, and then we translate it back to film. So it's like a layered process where it's inspired by film, we made it into theater, and then we figured out how to make films of it.
And we'll actually have another virtual event that we're a part of. June 17th, we did puppet animations for the LA Opera's production of Oedipus Rex. And that will be streaming online starting June 17th. So you can check that on our calendar page also.
Thank you so much for having us. It's been such a privilege to be a part of the After Dark program. And like we said earlier, we can't wait to be at the Exploratorium.
Thank you so much for tuning in.
thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Have a good night.